the last session. After this, we just have a wrap up where we will put together all the 11 sessions, what we have done, whether it's in terms of our neuroscience, whether it's in terms of self-empowerment and interpersonal relationship. How do we integrate all that? And more than anything else, what is the take home we are all going to kind of take back and implement in our own lives? Like when we started, we said it is not a program where we become more intelligent about neuroscience. It's not a program where we get greater awareness about purpose and flow. It's not a program to just understand how interpersonal relationship works. What we want is we want to take at least one element from each of these sessions, which we have had for the past 12 fortnights, and take one take home and say, okay, this is what I'm going to implement in my own life. Right? So we will spend some time on that in the next week as to what will be our plan for self-development and self-enrichment. So we said that in self-empowerment, there were 3 sessions, which was finding purpose and flow, time management, and stress management, which was all about the self. And then the interpersonal relationship, which is, yes, about the self, but in the way our self interacts with another person, which is about the critical thinking in an information surplus world, trust, empathy, and teamwork, communication. Trust, empathy, teamwork, and communication are joined at the hip. You can't really separate them. Without trust, there is no communication. And if there is trust, there is not much communication which is required. And all of these fall under the third circle, which we've all gone through many times in terms of cognitive flexibility, dispositional flexibility, and emotional flexibility. What really is communication? Okay. In terms of its basic definition itself, there are varied basic definitions of what communication is. So there is a little squirrel and a sparrow. What do you want for dinner? How about a corn? Just one? What about 4? I'm hungry, it says. Okay. And this is how communication goes. Okay. What the squirrel wanted was a corn, and what it got was a corn. All right. So when we talk about communication, there are a few things which we always say about good communicators. Okay. One is we say they have a tremendously wide vocabulary. The second thing we say when we come across good communicator is we tend to think that they have tremendous command over whatever language they're speaking in terms of the intonation, in terms of the punctuation, in terms of the modulation, all of that. They have a great command over the language, and they're able to integrate that with a very high quality, appropriate vocabulary. And they're usually smooth and glib. Glib has a negative connotation, so they're usually smooth. But there are many, many very good communicators who have none of these qualities. There are great communicators who don't have a great vocabulary, who might not have a great command over the language, and glib and smooth. We would have all seen people like that, but we somehow don't think of them as great communicators if they've been able to send across what is going on in their thought, what is going on in their mind, and if they're able to translate that into or transfer that into the other person using words, body language, and ideas. That is communication. There is nothing more to communication than that. Now, what do good communicators really do? There are 4 or 5 things good communicators do. Right? The first thing good communicators do is they get a very clean structure to what they want to communicate. If can you go on mute if you're not speaking, please? Thank you. So good communicators, the first thing is they get hold of a neat structure as to what is the idea I'm going to be communicating in that little interaction, in that transaction I'm having with the other person. So if we don't clearly decide what is that we want to communicate, we can't communicate that effectively. We have to have a very clear idea of what is that we want to say. And in that, the general thumb rule is there are many things we want to talk about on every subject. But if we say too many things about a certain subject in one go, what happens is in the process of our eagerness to explain and make other people understand everything which is there, everything along the way gets lost. Okay, so it's better to keep it down to maybe 2 or 3 points maximum and no more when it comes to communication. The third in communication, very, very important in communication, storyline. So when we mean a storyline, we don't mean adding a story. What we mean is we want to tell that in the form of a story. We want to say that in the form that there is a bit of suspense involved in it, there is a bit of wow involved in it. So there is a certain amount of storytelling ability which is definitely there with most good communicators. They might not have the greatest vocabulary or the command of their language. Storytelling, it's definitely one of the characteristics of a good communicator. Carefully choose metaphors and analogies that the other person understands. But of all these 5 points in the structure, be sincere, direct, and to the point. If we want to communicate something, it is best we actually communicate it in the way it is happening in our mind. We are much better off to just say what is going on. So we don't need to say everything which is going on in our mind to the other person. But if something about a certain person, if something about a certain transaction, about a certain project which did not go well, or whatever it is, we want to communicate to the other person, just say that sincerely, directly, precisely, to the point. Think about what is that you want to say, make it 2 or 3 points, build a clean story around it, and communicate it directly and sincerely. And don't give any messages which is beneath the surface. What happens is the credibility gets lost. People start wondering what is that you are trying to say underneath the surface. So don't give any subliminal messages. If you want to give a message, just say it. Whatever that is, it might be a little bit difficult for the other person to take it initially, but that's fine as long as it is done with the right amount of sincerity and directness, structure of a good communicator. The second is follow 3 steps when it comes to communication. I'm sure some of you would have heard it. First step, tell them what you're going to tell them. Don't keep too much of a suspense. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Step number 2, tell them. Step number 3, tell them what you told them. So the same point comes right up front. Tell them what you want to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Okay. So it's like an executive summary, body, and conclusion. So tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. These are the 3 steps in communication, and it's important we follow those 3 steps. Otherwise, sometimes people don't know where we are going with what we want to say. So the structure, the 3 steps, and the third. There are many times we have to communicate a bad news. We have to tell somebody that we are not happy with the way something happened where they were involved in it. And we want to tell them. Why do we want to tell them? Because we want to constructively criticize what they have done so that they don't repeat that mistake and change for the better. Sometimes we have to tell people that we are going to ask you to leave the organization. We have to say that. We don't want to shoot. So many of us were very uncomfortable when it comes to giving out bad news. We hold it back, or we shoot from somebody else's shoulders, or we use methods like texting. All of that are bad ideas when it comes to sharing bad news. When it comes to sharing bad news, remember, the person who is going to go through or hear the bad news is going through a lot more trouble than you. So you're not very relevant. The person who's the messenger of the bad news is not all that relevant. The person who's getting the message is going to go through a lot of emotion at that point in time. So always keep it face to face. Wait for the opportunity and do that over a cup of coffee, or do it formally in your office or wherever it is, but do it face to face. Second, tell them the bad news upfront. Right up front, tell them, you know what, we have decided to let go of you. Start with that. Don't start with anything else. Start straight away with the worst thing they can hear. Third, then you wrap it. The wrapping is really about giving one piece of good which we saw, state the bad news again, and put a good news at the end of it. Not necessarily a good news, it could be but it has to be a sincere comment. It can't be flattery, it can't be hypocritical comments just to kind of get over the situation. We have to face a bad news situation, but we can sincerely, if we are sincere, we will be able to find something good in every person. And to be able to put that as good, bad, good is a nice way to communicate. The message goes through far more effectively than just giving the bad news and leaving it there and leaving it cold. 80% communication is non-verbal, and therefore it's very important how sincere we are about the message which we are giving. Don't try to show sincerity, just be sincere. If you show sincerity, it comes out hypocritical. Just a couple more slides. Communication is a two-way process. Otherwise, we would have called it a didactic. So the first step in communication is to be able to listen. Just say what you have to say and then listen. When we say listen, we are not listening. In many of the times, what happens is when a discussion is going on, we are rehearsing what is the point we want to raise next. And all our time gets spent. It's a bit like when we shake hands with someone, right? And we introduce ourselves, and the other person says, I'm Anita, and I'm so focused on saying I'm Ramesh, I've forgotten what the other person's name is. And then after a few seconds, we ask the person, what did you say your name was? Okay. What was so important that I had to be so focused on saying I'm Ramesh? I know I'm Ramesh for the last 51 years, and therefore there is no need. So it's about how do you listen when the other person is speaking. Second part in communication is once in a while, when you feel you're losing the other person, request them for a recap. Okay. Or you can recap or request them for their understanding. Either one is fine. You can ask them, can you just tell me what have you understood from what I'm saying till now, so that we kind of know we are on the same page. Because it's all about the transfer of our thoughts from one person to another. And finally, tell them what you told them, which is the process of summarization. And we can always minute it or document it and put it down on a piece of paper so that it's all very clear as to what we have spoken, understood, and agreed as an action plan. So that way, communication becomes very clean. It is precise, it's structured, it's direct, it's sincere, and becomes very, very effective and very smooth. As you can see, none of this involved vocabulary or command over a language or glibness, smoothness, none of that. It's about a structuring. Communication is all about how we structure, how sincere are we, and how are we able to express that directly, precisely. So finally, it really comes down to only these three things. We've all seen the video by Professor Frances Frey, where she talks about saying, if trust is the core element of communication, like they say, if you really trust someone, no words are necessary. If you don't trust someone, any number of words is not sufficient. So building trust is about being sincere and being what you are. Okay. Everybody else is already taken. Just be what you are. That's all that is there to it. Second, is the logic. Now, in logic, there are two ways of building the logic. There is one, slightly more articulate people are able to do that, which is you take them in a certain place and wind and wind and wind and wind your story, and finally you land in a conclusion which has a bit of a aha and a bit of humor in it. If that is not our core strength, if that kind of articulation is not our core strength, and we identify and recognize that that is not our core strength, it is better we start with what we are going to say, which is we get into a meeting and say, listen, we are now 140 members in this school as teachers. At this point in time, given that the school children are not paying the full fees, we have to necessarily bring it down from 140 to 100. Now, how do we decide who the 40 people are whom we are going to let go? That is the purpose of this meeting. That's clean, direct, bad news, face to face, sincere. It's fine because we have to go through it as leaders. It's how we build the logic. If storytelling is not our core strength, say the news first and then build your logic behind it. And third, which is the empathy, which is our ability to put ourselves in the shoes of others and try and understand them. Listen to what the other person is saying. Listen to whether the other person has understood what you're saying. Ask for their understanding. Ask for a recap. Summarize what you have said so that the communication is effective and gets transferred as effectively as it can. Okay. So I was, okay, great.